I never thought of myself as someone who'd end up working the night shift. I was always the kind of person who preferred the daylight, the hum of people going about their business, the comfort of knowing that if something went wrong, there'd be someone nearby to help. But life has a way of pushing you into corners you never expected, and sometimes the only way out is through a door you never wanted to open. It started with a job posting on a community board at the grocery store. Overnight attendant needed. Reliable, discreet, good pay. I was between jobs, my savings were running out, and the rent was due in less than 2 weeks. I'd applied to dozens of places, but no one was calling back. The ad was handwritten, the kind of thing you'd expect to see for a lost cat or a yard sale, not a job. But the words "good pay" caught my eye, and desperation does strange things to your standards that I called the number, expecting to get a voicemail or maybe a gruff manager. Instead, a woman answered on the first ring. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, and she asked me a few questions, nothing about my experience, just if I had reliable transportation, if I could stay awake all night, and if I was comfortable being alone. I lied and said yes to all three. She told me to come by that evening for an interview. The address she gave me was for a small office building on the edge of town, the kind of place you drive past 100 times and never notice. It was wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop, both of which looked like they hadn't seen customers in years. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and the only light came from a flickering street lamp that cast long, jittery shadows across the asphalt that I almost turned around and left, but the thought of my empty bank account kept me moving forward. I knocked on the glass door, and after a moment, the woman from the phone appeared. She was older, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. She introduced herself as Mrs. Hargrove and led me inside. The office was clean but sparse, with a single desk, a battered filing cabinet, and a row of security monitors showing grainy footage of empty hallways and storage rooms. She explained that the building was used for document storage by several local businesses, and my job would be to keep an eye on things overnight, make sure no one broke in, answer the phone if it rang, and do a walkthrough every hour. She handed me a set of keys, a flashlight, and a clipboard with a checklist of rooms to inspect. The pay was more than I'd expected, and she paid me in cash at the end of each shift. There was no paperwork, no background check, just a handshake and a promise to show up on time. It all felt a little off, but I told myself it was just an easy gig, a lucky break in a string of bad luck, that my first night was uneventful. I sat at the desk, watched the monitors, and did my rounds. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes you hyper-aware of every creak and groan. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. I checked each room, ticking them off on the clipboard, and tried not to think about how empty the place felt by the third night. I'd settled into a routine. I brought a thermos of coffee, a paperback novel, and my phone loaded with podcasts. The hours dragged, but the money was good, and I started to think maybe I'd lucked out after all. That IT was on the fourth night that things started to change. That IT was just after 2 a.m. I was halfway through my rounds, walking down the main hallway with my flashlight. The building was colder than usual, and my breath fogged in the beam of light. I chalked it up to the air conditioning kicking in, but the chill felt different, sharper, like it was seeping into my bones. As I passed the supply closet, I heard a faint tapping sound. I stopped, listening, but it faded away. I told myself it was just the pipes or maybe a mouse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I finished my rounds and returned to the desk, trying to focus on my book, but my eyes kept drifting to the monitors. At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang. The sound was jarring in the silence, and I nearly spilled my coffee. I picked up, expecting a wrong number or maybe Mrs. Hargrove checking in, but there was only static on the other end. I said hello twice, but no one answered. After a few seconds, the line went dead. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. I checked the monitors again, scanning each feed for movement, but the hallways were empty. I told myself I was being paranoid, that night shifts do strange things to your mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next night, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder, more insistent, coming from the far end of the building near the old records room. I hesitated, then forced myself to investigate. The hallway was darker than usual, the overhead lights flickering as I approached. The door to the records room was ajar, just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside that I pushed the door open, shining my flashlight around the room. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the gloom, stacked with boxes and binders. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old paper was overwhelming. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The tapping stopped that I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, listening to the silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the stacks, I heard a whisper. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. A single word, drawn out and breathy. Help. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I forced myself to move forward, shining my light between the shelves. The whisper came again, closer this time. Help me. I called out, my voice trembling. Is someone there? No answer. Just the sound of my own breathing, loud in the stillness that I backed out of the room, closed the door, and locked it. I wish I could say I finally snapped. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and jumpy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When my shift ended, I drove home with the radio turned up, trying to drown out the memory of that voice. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that the money wasn't worth it, but when evening came, I found myself pulling into the parking lot once again. The next few nights were worse. The tapping became a regular occurrence, always in different parts of the building. Sometimes it was soft, like fingernails on glass. Other times it was loud enough to make me jump. The whispers grew more frequent, always just out of earshot, always pleading that I started to dread the walkthroughs. The hallways felt longer, the shadows deeper. I caught glimpses of movement in the corners of my eyes, a flicker of white, a shape darting behind a door. The monitors showed nothing, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. One night, as I was making my rounds, I found a door that I didn't remember seeing before. It was at the end of a hallway that should have ended in a blank wall, but there it was, a heavy wooden door, painted black, with no handle or keyhole. I reached out to touch it, and the surface was ice cold, colder than anything else in the building. I pressed my ear to the door and heard a faint scratching sound, like something trying to claw its way out. I stumbled back, heart racing, and nearly dropped my flashlight. When I looked again, the door was gone, just a blank wall, as if it had never been there. I started to keep a journal, writing down everything that happened each night. I hoped that by putting it on paper, I could make sense of it, find some rational explanation. But the more I wrote, the less sense it made. The events didn't follow any pattern. Sometimes the noises would start as soon as I arrived, other times not until just before dawn. Sometimes I'd find objects moved, chairs pulled away from desks, doors left open that I knew I'd closed. I tried to talk to Mrs. Hargrove about it, but she just smiled and told me not to worry. Old buildings make strange noises, she said. You'll get used to it. But I never did. One night, I arrived to find the front door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it when I left, but I told myself I must have forgotten. As I walked through the building, I found a trail of muddy footprints leading from the entrance to the records room. They were small, like a child's, and they stopped abruptly in the middle of the room. I followed the trail, shining my flashlight on the floor. The footprints ended at a single box, pulled halfway off the shelf. I reached out to push it back, and as I did, the box toppled over, spilling its contents onto the floor. Inside were dozens of old photographs, black and white, faded with age. They showed the building as it was decades ago, filled with people I didn't recognize. In the center of each photo was a little girl, always standing apart from the others, always staring directly at the camera. As I sifted through the photos, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the room was empty. I gathered up the photos, put them back in the box, and left the room, locking the door behind me. But the feeling of being watched lingered, following me through the rest of my shift. That was the night I started seeing her. At first, it was just a glimpse, a pale face reflected in a window, a shadow flitting across the hallway. But as the nights went on, she became more real, more present. I'd catch her standing at the end of the hallway, her dress white and tattered, her hair hanging in tangled strands over her face. She never moved, never spoke, just watched me with dark, hollow eyes. I tried to ignore her, to focus on my work, but it was impossible. Every time I looked up, she was there, closer than before. I stopped doing my rounds, staying at the desk with the monitors, but even then, I'd see her on the screens, standing in rooms that should have been emptied. I started to lose track of time. The nights blurred together, each one more terrifying than the last. I stopped sleeping during the day, afraid of what I might dream. My friends stopped calling, my family stopped visiting. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape. And still, I kept coming back. I wish I could say I finally snapped out of it, that I quit and never looked back. But the truth is, fear has a way of rooting you in place. It's like a cold hand on your shoulder, squeezing tighter every time you try to move. I told myself I needed the money, that I was just tired, that it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with that building, something that went beyond creaking pipes and flickering lights. The next night, I arrived early, hoping to catch Mrs. Hargrove before she left. I wanted answers, or at least some reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. She was in her office, sorting through a stack of papers. When I told her about the girl, about the photographs and the footprints, she listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she set the papers aside and folded her hands on the desk. "You're not the first to see her," she said softly. "This building has a history. Most people don't last more than a week on the night shift. But you've lasted longer than anyone." I stared at her, waiting for her to say more, but she just smiled, that same tight, distant smile. "If you want to leave, I'll understand. But if you stay, you need to accept that some things can't be explained. Not everything that walks these halls is meant to be seen." She handed me my pay for the week, more than I'd expected, and told me to think about what I wanted to do. I left her office feeling more confused than ever. That night, the building felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. I sat at the desk, staring at the monitors, but the screens were filled with static. I tried to adjust the controls, but nothing worked. I was alone, cut off from the rest of the world. The tapping started again, louder this time, echoing through the empty hallways. I tried to ignore it, but it grew more insistent, like someone pounding on the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and forced myself to do my rounds, my heart pounding in my chest as I walked down the main hallway. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, shuffling, like bare feet on linoleum. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I kept moving, my nerves stretched to the breaking point. When I reached the records room, the door was wide open. The air inside was freezing, and I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. The shelves were empty, the boxes gone. In the center of the room stood the little girl from the photographs, her dress stained and torn, her hair hanging over her face. She looked up at me, her eyes black and bottomless. "Help me," she whispered, but I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my body refusing to obey. She took a step toward me, her bare feet leaving wet, bloody prints on the floor. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "He won't let me leave." I forced myself to speak, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Who won't let you leave?" She looked past me, her eyes widening in terror. "He's coming." The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I felt a presence behind me, a cold, suffocating weight pressing down on my shoulders that I turned, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. When I looked back, the girl was gone. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I made my way back to the desk, locking the door and pushing a chair against it for good measure. I sat there for hours, listening to the sounds of the building, the tapping, the footsteps, the faint, desperate whispers. I tried to call Mrs. Hargrove, but my phone was dead. The battery drained even though I'd charged it before my shift at dawn. I left the building without looking back. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I spent the next day in bed, unable to sleep, unable to eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the girl's face, heard her voice pleading for help. I knew I should quit, that I should never set foot in that building again. But something kept pulling me back, a sense of unfinished business, of a story that needed an ending. That night, I returned to the office. The parking lot was empty, the street lamp flickering overhead. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar chill settling over me like a shroud. The monitors were working again, the screens showing the empty hallways and storage rooms. I sat at the desk, waiting, listening. At midnight, the phone rang. I answered, expecting static, but this time there was a voice, a man's voice, deep and rough. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You need to leave. She's not yours to save." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. I tried to call the number back, but there was no dial tone, just silence. I did my rounds, moving quickly through the building. The air was thick with tension, every shadow seeming to move just out of sight. When I reached the records room, the door was closed. I hesitated, then unlocked it and stepped inside. The shelves were full again, the boxes stacked neatly in rows. On the floor, in the center of the room, was a single photograph, one I hadn't seen before. It showed the little girl, standing in front of the building, her hand held by a man whose face was blurred, as if the camera had been unable to capture it. I picked up the photo, turning it over in my hands. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't let him find you." A cold wind swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but the handle wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The temperature dropped, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I heard footsteps outside the door, slow and deliberate. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. I pressed myself against the shelves, clutching the flashlight, but the beam barely cut through the gloom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice, low, guttural, barely more than a growl. "She's mine." The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. He was tall, his face hidden in shadow, his eyes glowing with a cold, unnatural light. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, like a predator stalking its prey. I tried to speak, to plead, but no sound came out. He reached for me, his hand cold and heavy on my shoulder. "You don't belong here," he whispered. "Leave, or you'll never leave at all." I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. But when I opened them, I was alone. The room was empty, the door standing open. The photograph was gone. I stumbled out of the records room, my legs weak and unsteady. I made my way back to the desk, collapsing into the chair. I sat there until dawn, too afraid to move. When Mrs. Hargrove arrived in the morning, she found me still at the desk, my face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything, just handed me my pay and told me to go home. I slept for 12 hours straight, my dreams filled with shadows and whispers. When I woke, I knew I couldn't go back. I called Mrs. Hargrove and told her I was quitting. She didn't sound surprised. "Most people do," she said. "Take care of yourself." I tried to move on, to put the experience behind me, but the memories lingered. I found myself jumping at shadows, flinching at every unexpected sound. I started seeing the girl everywhere, in reflections, in crowds, in the corner of my eye. She was always watching, always waiting. I did some research, trying to find out more about the building. I learned that it had once been an orphanage, decades ago, before it was converted into offices. There had been a fire, and several children had died, including a little girl named Emily. The man who ran the orphanage had disappeared, his body never found. The more I learned, the more the pieces fell into place. The girl, the man, the voices, they were all echoes of a tragedy that had never been resolved. That I started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams of being trapped in the building, chased by the man with the glowing eyes. In the dreams, the girl would reach out to me, begging for help, but I could never save her. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. One night, I woke to find my bedroom freezing cold, my breath visible in the air. I heard tapping at the window, soft and insistent. I got up, heart pounding, and pulled back the curtain. There, standing in the yard, was the girl. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Help me," she whispered. That I stumbled back, tripping over a chair. When I looked again, she was gone. That I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, a trick of the mind, but I knew better. She was still out there, still trapped, still waiting for someone to help her. I started seeing signs, strange symbols drawn in chalk on the sidewalk, doors left open that I knew I'd closed, cold spots in my apartment. I felt like I was being watched, followed, haunted. I tried to ignore it, to go about my life, but the fear never left me. It was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. One night, I woke to find the girl standing at the foot of my bed. She was crying, her tears leaving dark stains on the floor. "Please," she begged. "He's coming." I sat up, reaching for her, but my hand passed right through her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with terror. "He won't let me go," she whispered. "You have to help me." Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving only the sound of her sobs echoing in the darkness. I knew then that I couldn't run from this, that I had to face whatever was haunting me. I had to go back to the building, to find a way to set her free. I spent the next day preparing, gathering everything I thought I might need: a flashlight, a camera, a notebook, a small vial of holy water I'd bought from a church gift shop. I didn't know if any of it would help, but it made me feel less helpless. That night, I returned to the office. The building was dark, the windows boarded up. A sign on the door read, "Closed for renovations." But the lock was broken, and the door swung open at my touch. That I stepped inside, the familiar chill settling over me. The air was thick with dust, the smell of smoke lingering in the halls. I made my way to the records room, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The room was empty, the shelves bare. In the center of the floor was a single photograph, the same one I'd found before, the girl and the man standing in front of the building. I picked up the photo, turning it over. This time, the message on the back was different. "Set her free." I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The man was there, his eyes glowing, his face twisted in anger. "She's mine," he growled. "You can't have her." I stood my ground, my heart pounding. "Let her go," I said, my voice shaking. "She doesn't belong here." He laughed, a low, guttural sound. "You don't understand. She's all I have." I took a step forward, holding out the photograph. "You can't keep her here. It's time to let go." He hesitated, his expression flickering between rage and sorrow. For a moment, I saw something human in his eyes, a flicker of pain, of loss. The girl appeared beside me, her hand slipping into mine. She looked up at the man, her eyes filled with tears. "Please," she whispered. "Let me go." The man's shoulders slumped, and he stepped back, his form flickering like a dying flame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just wanted to keep you safe." The girl squeezed my hand, and together we stepped forward, passing through the man's shadow. As we did, the room filled with light, warm and golden, washing away the darkness. When the light faded, I was alone. The photograph was gone. The room emptied, and I left the building as the sun rose, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. I felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I never saw the girl again, but sometimes, late at night, I hear her laughter in the wind, a gentle reminder that some stories do have an ending. After that night, I tried to return to normal life. I found a new job at a hardware store, working regular hours, surrounded by people and the comforting clatter of hammers and drills. The nightmares faded, and the cold spots in my apartment disappeared. For the first time in months, I felt safe. But safety, I learned, is a fragile thing. It can be shattered in an instant, and the pieces are never quite the same when you try to put them back together. It was a rainy Thursday when I got the call. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled me to answer. On the other end was a man who introduced himself as Detective Harris. He said he was investigating a series of break-ins at the old office building where I'd worked the night shift. He wanted to ask me a few questions. I agreed to meet him at a diner near the edge of town. The place was nearly empty. The only other customers a pair of truckers nursing mugs of coffee. Detective Harris was waiting in a booth by the window, a thick folder open in front of him. He was older, with a tired face and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He asked me about my time at the building, if I'd noticed anything unusual. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. The man's shoulders slumped, and he stepped back, his form flickering like a dying flame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just wanted to keep you safe." The girl squeezed my hand, and together we stepped forward, passing through the man's shadow. As we did, the room filled with light, warm and golden, washing away the darkness. When the light faded, I was alone. The photograph was gone. The room emptied, and I left the building as the sun rose, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. I felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I never saw the girl again, but sometimes, late at night, I hear her laughter in the wind, a gentle reminder that some stories do have an ending. After that night, I tried to return to normal life. I found a new job at a hardware store, working regular hours, surrounded by people and the comforting clatter of hammers and drills. The nightmares faded, and the cold spots in my apartment disappeared. For the first time in months, I felt safe. But safety, I learned, is a fragile thing. It can be shattered in an instant, and the pieces are never quite the same when you try to put them back together. It was a rainy Thursday when I got the call. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled me to answer. On the other end was a man who introduced himself as Detective Harris. He said he was investigating a series of break-ins at the old office building where I'd worked the night shift. He wanted to ask me a few questions. I agreed to meet him at a diner near the edge of town. The place was nearly empty. The only other customers a pair of truckers nursing mugs of coffee. Detective Harris was waiting in a booth by the window, a thick folder open in front of him. He was older, with a tired face and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He asked me about my time at the building, if I'd noticed anything unusual. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. I told him about the noises, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched. I left out the girl, the man, the photographs. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. He listened carefully, jotting down notes in a battered notebook. When I finished, he slid a photograph across the table. It was the girl, Emily, standing in front of the building, her hand held by the same blurred figure. "Do you recognize her?" he asked. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Her name was Emily. She died in the fire. He studied me for a long moment, then closed the folder. "You're not the first to see her," he said quietly. "We've had reports from other night guards, even some of the construction workers. They all described the same thing, a little girl, lost and afraid, looking for someone to help her. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's something wrong with that building. Always has been. I've seen things there I can't explain. But you're the only one who's ever made it out without losing your mind." I didn't know what to say. I stared at the photograph, the weight of it pressing down on me. Detective Harris paid for our coffee and walked me to my car. As I was about to leave, he handed me a small envelope. "If you ever see her again," he said, "open this. It might help." I drove home in a daze, the envelope burning a hole in my pocket. I put it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But forgetting is easier said than done. A week later, I started noticing strange things again. Doors left open, lights flickering, cold drafts in the middle of summer. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was still on edge from the meeting with Detective Harris. But the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. One night, I woke to find the envelope on my nightstand, even though I was sure I'd left it in the drawer. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. At the bottom was a note in Detective Harris's handwriting. "If she calls for you, follow the signs." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I called Detective Harris, but the number was disconnected. I drove to the police station, but no one there had heard of him. There was no record of a Detective Harris in the department, no case files matching his description. That I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, if the stress had finally gotten to me. But the envelope was real, the symbols etched into my memory. That night, the tapping returned. It started softly, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder, more insistent. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and followed the sound to the living room. There, on the window, was a handprint, small, delicate, pressed into the glass from the outside. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the glass. The handprint faded, replaced by a single word, written in the condensation. "Help." I grabbed the envelope and the flashlight and left my apartment, not bothering to lock the door behind me. The streets were empty, the city asleep. I drove to the old office building, the rain pounding against the windshield. The building was dark, the windows boarded up, but the front door was ajar. I stepped inside, the familiar chill settling over me. The symbols from the envelope were scrawled on the walls, glowing faintly in the darkness. I followed them, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. They led me to the records room, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the shelves were gone, replaced by a single chair in the center of the room. Sitting in the chair was Emily, her dress torn and dirty, her hair matted with soot. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "He's coming," she whispered. I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. "I'm here," I said. "I won't let him hurt you." The air grew colder, the lights flickering. The man appeared in the doorway, his eyes burning with rage. "You shouldn't have come back," he growled. That I stood, placing myself between him and Emily. "Let her go," I said, my voice steadied. He laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You don't understand. She belongs to me." I pulled the sheet of paper from the envelope, holding it up between us. The symbols glowed brighter, filling the room with a warm, golden light. The man recoiled, his form flickering. "No," he hissed. "You can't take her from me." Emily squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let go," she whispered. The light grew brighter, the symbols swirling around us. The man screamed, his voice echoing off the walls. He lunged at us, but the light pushed him back, his form dissolving into smoke. When the light faded, the room was empty. Emily was gone, her hand slipping from mine. I stood alone in the darkness, the sheet of paper crumbling to dust in my hand. I left the building as the sun rose, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. I felt empty, hollow, as if a part of me had been left behind. I tried to move on, to rebuild my life, but the memories lingered. I found myself drawn to abandoned buildings, to places where the air was thick with secrets. I started seeing things, shadows that moved on their own, whispers in the dark, faces in the windows that I became obsessed with the symbols, researching them online, trying to find their meaning. I found references to ancient rituals, to protection spells, to ways of banishing restless spirits. But nothing matched exactly, nothing explained what I'd seen. I started keeping a journal again, documenting every strange occurrence, every dream, every fleeting glimpse of Emily. I hoped that by writing it down, I could make sense of it, find some closure. But closure is a myth, a story we tell ourselves to make the darkness less frightening. One night, I woke to find my journal open on the nightstand. A single word scrawled across the page in a child's handwriting. "Thank you." I stared at the word, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. But peace, like safety, is fleeting. A few weeks later, I got another call, this time from a woman named Mrs. Carter. She said she was the new owner of the office building, that she was planning to renovate and wanted to know if I'd be interested in working security during the construction. That I hesitated, the memories flooding back. But something in her voice, an urgency, a desperation, made me agree to meet her. We met at the building, the sun setting behind the clouds. Mrs. Carter was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a nervous energy. She explained that the workers had been complaining of strange noises, of tools going missing, of cold spots and flickering lights. "They say the place is haunted," she said, forcing a laugh. "But I don't believe in ghosts." I smiled, but said nothing. She offered me the job, and against my better judgment, I accepted. The first night was quiet. The workers had left early, spooked by a series of unexplained power outages. I walked the halls, flashlight in hand, the familiar chill settling over me. I checked each room, making sure the doors were locked, the windows secure. In the records room, I found a single photograph on the floor, Emily, standing in front of the building, her hand held by a new figure. This time, the face was clear that it was me. I stared at the photograph, my mind racing. How could this be? I turned it over, but there was no message, no symbols, just a blank white surface. That I slipped the photo into my pocket and finished my rounds, my nerves on edge. That night, I dreamed of Emily. She was standing in a field of wildflowers, her dress clean and white, her hair shining in the sunlight. She smiled at me, her eyes bright and clear. "Thank you," she said. "I'm free now." I woke with a start, the photograph still in my pocket. The next few nights were uneventful. The workers returned, the renovations progressing smoothly. The strange occurrences stopped, the cold spots disappeared, the light stayed on. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. But on the seventh night, everything changed. I was making my rounds when I heard a voice, a low, guttural whisper, echoing through the empty halls. "She's mine." I spun around, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The man was there, his eyes burning with rage. "You can't have her," he growled. "She belongs to me." I stood my ground, the photograph clutched in my hand. "She's free," I said. "You can't hurt her anymore." He laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You don't understand. There are others. So many others." The air grew colder, the lights flickering. Shadows moved on their own, swirling around us. "You can't save them all," he whispered. "You can't even save yourself." He lunged at me, his form dissolving into smoke. I stumbled back, the photograph slipping from my grasp. When I looked up, he was gone. I finished my rounds, my nerves shot. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that the stress was getting to me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The building wasn't just haunted by Emily. There were others, lost, forgotten, trapped in the darkness, and I was the only one who could help them. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw faces, some familiar, some not, staring at me from the darkness. They whispered my name, their voices overlapping in a chorus of longing and regret. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, if the line between reality and nightmare had finally blurred beyond repair, but I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when I knew there were others, still trapped, still waiting for someone to notice them. I started spending more time at the building, staying late after my shift ended, wandering the halls with my flashlight and notebook. I made a list of every strange occurrence, every cold spot, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. The workers noticed. They started avoiding me, whispering behind my back. I didn't blame them. I must have looked like a ghost myself, pale, hollow-eyed, always glancing over my shoulder. But I didn't care. I was searching for something, even if I didn't know what it was. One night, as I was making my rounds, I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic humming, like a lullaby sung by a child. I followed the sound to the basement, a place I'd always avoided. The air was thick with dust, the walls lined with old pipes and broken furniture. In the far corner, I found a door I'd never seen before. It was small, barely big enough for a child to pass through, and covered in strange symbols, some of which matched the ones from the envelope Detective Harris had given me. My heart pounded as I knelt down, tracing the symbols with my fingers. The humming grew louder, more insistent. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, lit by a single, flickering bulb. The walls were covered in drawings, crude, childlike sketches of people, animals, and places I didn't recognize. In the center of the room sat a little boy, no older than 6 or 7, his knees drawn up to his chest. He looked up as I entered, his eyes wide and frightened. "Are you here to help me?" he whispered. I nodded, kneeling beside him. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he said, his voice barely audible. "I can't find my mom." I felt a lump in my throat. "How long have you been here, Tommy?" He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "A long time. He won't let me leave." I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of the man, but we were alone. I took Tommy's hand, the chill of his skin sending a shiver up my spine. "Come with me," I said. "I'll help you find your mom." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "He's watching." I squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him. "He can't hurt you. Not while I'm here." We left the room, the door swinging shut behind us. The humming faded, replaced by the sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway above. We made our way back to the main floor, Tommy clinging to my side. The building felt different, heavier, darker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I could feel the man's presence, lurking just out of sight. As we reached the lobby, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam barely cutting through the gloom. "Stay close," I whispered as we moved slowly, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by the silence. I could hear the man's voice, low and mocking, echoing through the halls. "You can't save him," he taunted. "He belongs to me." I ignored him, focusing on Tommy. We reached the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled, but it was as if the building itself was holding us captive. Tommy started to cry, his sobs echoing in the darkness. I knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his trembling form. "It's okay," I whispered. "We'll find another way." I remembered the symbols from the envelope, the way they had glowed when I held them up to the man. I pulled out my notebook and quickly sketched the symbols on the door, my hands shaking. As I finished the last symbol, the door creaked open, a rush of cold air flooding the lobby. I grabbed Tommy's hand and pulled him outside, the man's scream echoing behind us. We stumbled into the street, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. Tommy clung to me, his tears soaking my shirt. "Thank you," he whispered. I knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his eyes. "Do you know where your mom is?" He shook his head. She's gone. He took her. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I'm sorry, Tommy. He smiled, a small, sad smile. It's okay. I'm not alone anymore. He faded before my eyes, his form dissolving into the morning light. I sat on the curb, my heart heavy. Another soul set free, but the man was still out there, still hunting, still trapping the lost and forgotten. That I knew then that this was my purpose, to help those who couldn't help themselves, to shine a light in the darkness, even if it meant facing my own fears. The days blurred together, each one a battle against the shadows. I started seeing more children, lost, frightened, searching for someone to notice them. Some were easy to help, their stories simple and their needs clear. Others were harder, their pain buried deep, their memories twisted by years of neglect. I learned to listen, to be patient, to let them come to me in their own time. I kept my notebook close, filling it with sketches and notes, trying to piece together the puzzle of the building's past. I found old records in the city archives, reports of missing children, unexplained deaths, fires that had never been fully investigated. The building had a long, dark history stretching back decades. It was as if the walls themselves were hungry, feeding on the pain and fear of those trapped inside. That I started to wonder if the man was just a symptom, a manifestation of the building's evil, or if he was something more, something ancient, something that had always been there. One night, as I was reviewing my notes, I found a pattern, a series of dates, each one marking a tragedy in the building's history. Fires, accidents, disappearances. Each event spaced exactly 7 years apart. The next date was only a week away. I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever was happening, it was building to something, and I was running out of time. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies, researching rituals and protection spells. I reached out to experts, paranormal investigators, priests, even a local shaman. Most of them dismissed me, but a few listened, their eyes dark with understanding. Point one, an old woman named Agnes agreed to meet me at the building. She arrived at dusk, her arms laden with candles, herbs, and a bundle of sage. "This place is sick," she said, her voice gravelly. "It needs to be cleansed." We walked the halls together, Agnes chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The air grew thick, the shadows swirling around us. I could feel the man's presence, angry and afraid. As we reached the basement, the temperature dropped, our breath visible in the air. Agnes lit the sage, the smoke curling around us. "He's here," she whispered. The man appeared in the doorway, his eyes burning with rage. "You can't stop me," he snarled. "They belong to me." Agnes stood her ground, her voice steady. "You have no power here. Your time is over." She began to chant, the words rising in a crescendo. The man screamed, his form flickering, dissolving into smoke. The walls shook, the floor trembling beneath our feet. I grabbed Agnes's hand, holding on as the building seemed to come alive, the shadows writhing and twisting. With a final, ear-splitting scream, the man vanished, the darkness lifting, the air cleared, the temperature rising. The building felt lighter, the oppressive weight gone. Agnes smiled, her eyes twinkling. "It's done." I thanked her, my heart overflowing with gratitude. As we left the building, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure. The children were gone, their spirits set free. The man was gone, his hold on the building broken, but I knew the work wasn't over. There were other buildings, other places where the shadows lingered, where the lost and forgotten waited for someone to notice them. That I made a promise to myself, to keep searching, to keep helping, to never turn away from those in need. The nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of light and laughter. I found joy in the simple things, a cup of coffee, a walk in the park, a conversation with a friend. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, the echoes of the past. They remind me that the darkness is never truly gone, that it waits in the corners, patient and hungry. And I remind myself that as long as I have the courage to face it, as long as I'm willing to help those who can't help themselves, I'll never be alone. Months passed. The city moved on, and so did I, at least on the surface. I took a job at a small bookstore, the kind of place where the air always smelled of paper and coffee, and the regulars greeted you by name. I found comfort in the routine, in the quiet hours spent shelving books and chatting with customers about their favorite stories. For a while, it felt like I'd finally left the darkness behind, but the past has a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. It started with a letter. No return address, just my name written in careful, looping script. Inside was a single photograph, an old, sepia-toned image of a building I didn't recognize. In the window, barely visible, was the face of a child, eyes wide and pleading. On the back, a message, "They're waiting." I stared at the photograph for a long time, my heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, that someone was playing a cruel joke. But deep down, I knew better. The darkness wasn't finished with me yet. That night, I dreamed of the building. I wandered its empty halls, the air thick with dust and sorrow. I heard the voices of children, their laughter echoing through the rooms. I followed the sound, my footsteps silent on the worn wooden floors. In the dream, I found a door at the end of a long hallway. It was painted red, the color faded and peeling. I reached for the handle, but it was ice cold, burning my skin. I heard a voice behind me, a child's voice, soft and desperate. "Please, don't leave us." I woke with a start, my sheets tangled around me, my skin clammy with sweat. The photograph lay on my nightstand, the child's eyes watching me. I knew what I had to do. The next day, I took the photograph to the city archives, hoping to find some clue about the building's location. The clerk was helpful, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she searched the database. After a few minutes, she found a match, a boarding house on the outskirts of town, abandoned for decades. I drove out that afternoon, the photograph clutched in my hand. The building was exactly as I'd seen in my dream. 3 stories tall, its windows boarded up, the paint peeling from the walls. The yard was overgrown, weeds choking the path to the front door. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave the past buried. But I couldn't. Not when I knew there were children inside, waiting for someone to notice them. I forced the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with dust, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. I moved slowly, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The rooms were empty, the furniture covered in sheets. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I made my way to the second floor, the stairs groaning under my weight. At the end of the hallway, I found the red door from my dream. The paint was faded, the wood splintered, but the handle was warm to the touch. I took a deep breath and turned the handle. Inside, the room was filled with toys, dolls, cars, blocks, all arranged in neat rows. In the center of the room sat a group of children, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes wide with fear. They looked up as I entered, their voices rising in a chorus of hope and desperation. "Are you here to help us?" I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I'll do whatever I can." A little girl stood, her dress tattered and dirty. She stepped forward, her eyes shining with tears. "He won't let us leave," she whispered. "He says we belong to him." I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. "Who is he?" She glanced over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The caretaker. He watches us. He punishes us if we try to leave." I felt a surge of anger, of protectiveness. "You don't belong to him. You're not alone anymore." The air grew colder, the shadows deepening. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. The caretaker appeared in the doorway, his face hidden in shadow. He was tall, his shoulders hunched, his hands twisted into claws. "You shouldn't be here," he growled. "They're mine." I stood, placing myself between him and the children. "Let them go," I said. My voice steadied. He laughed, a low, cruel sound. "You can't save them. You can't even save yourself." I remembered the symbols from the office building, the way they had glowed in the darkness. I pulled out my notebook and quickly sketched the symbols on the floor, my hands shaking. The caretaker recoiled, his form flickering. "No," he hissed. "You don't understand. They need me." The children clung to me, their voices rising in a chorus of fear and hope. "Please, don't let him take us." I finished the last symbol, the lines glowing with a soft, golden light. The caretaker screamed, his form dissolving into smoke. The room filled with light, warm and comforting. The children smiled, their faces brightening. "Thank you," the little girl whispered. "We're free now." They faded before my eyes, their laughter echoing in the empty room that I stood alone, the weight of their gratitude settling over me like a blanket. I left the building as the sun set, the photograph still clutched in my hand. The child's face was gone, replaced by a blank window that I drove home in silence, my mind racing. I knew this wasn't the end. There were other buildings, other children, other caretakers. The darkness was everywhere, hiding in plain sight, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew my purpose. I would keep searching, keep helping, keep shining a light in the darkness. The nightmares returned, but they were different now. Instead of fear, I felt hope. I saw the children I'd helped, their faces bright and smiling. I heard their laughter, their voices calling out to me. "Thank you." I started volunteering at a local shelter, helping children who had nowhere else to go. I listened to their stories, offered comfort and support. I became a mentor, a friend, a protector. The darkness was still there, lurking in the corners, but it didn't scare me anymore. I knew I could face it, that I could make a difference. One night, as I was closing up the bookstore, I found another letter on the counter. This one was different, no photograph, just a single sheet of paper covered in symbols. At the bottom, a message, "They're waiting." I smiled, tucking the letter into my pocket. I was ready. The next day, I woke before dawn, the city still wrapped in darkness. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread out before me, the symbols almost pulsing in the dim light. I traced them with my finger, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. I knew what I had to do. I packed a small bag, flashlight, notebook, a thermos of coffee, and the letters and photographs I'd collected over the months. I left a note for my manager at the bookstore, just in case I didn't make it back in time for my shift. Then I stepped out into the cool morning air, the city just beginning to stir. The address on the letter led me to a part of town I'd never visited before. The streets were narrow, lined with old brick buildings and faded signs. I parked my car and walked the last few blocks, the letter clutched in my hand. The building was easy to spot, a crumbling mansion set back from the street, its windows dark and empty. The front gate hung open, the iron twisted and rusted. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed through, my footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, and every shadow seemed to shift as I passed. I moved slowly, my flashlight sweeping across faded wallpaper and broken furniture that I followed the symbols, just as I had before. They were scrawled on the walls, carved into the banister, painted on the doors. Each one glowed faintly as I passed, guiding me deeper into the house. On the second floor, I found a door covered in symbols, the wood splintered and scarred. I pressed my hand to the surface, feeling a jolt of energy run through me. The door swung open, revealing a room filled with toys and children's drawings. In the center of the room stood a group of children, their faces pale and frightened. They looked up as I entered, hope flickering in their eyes. "Are you here to help us?" one of them asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, kneeling beside her. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and heavy. The caretaker appeared in the doorway, his eyes burning with anger. You again, he snarled. You can't save them. You can't save yourself. I stood, placing myself between him and the children. You're wrong, I said, my voice steady. They don't belong to you. They never did. He lunged at me, his form flickering and twisting. I held up the letter, the symbols glowing brighter, filling the room with golden light. The caretaker screamed, his form dissolving into smoke. The children clung to me, their voices rising in a chorus of relief and gratitude. Thank you, they whispered. Thank you. The light faded, and the room was empty. The toys and drawings were gone. The air warm and still. I stood alone, the weight of the children's gratitude settling over me. I felt lighter, freer, as if a burden I hadn't known I was carrying had finally been lifted. I left the mansion as the sun rose, the first rays of light breaking through the clouds. The city was waking up, the streets filling with people and noise. I walked back to my car, the letter tucked safely in my pocket. As I drove home, I thought about everything I'd seen, everything I'd done. I thought about the children I'd helped, the darkness I'd faced, the caretakers I'd confronted. I knew there would always be more buildings, more lost souls, more shadows waiting in the corners, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I returned to my life, to the bookstore and the shelter and the quiet moments of peace I'd learned to cherish. I kept the letters and photographs in a box under my bed, a reminder of the battles I'd fought and the lives I'd touched. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, the voices of the children, calling out in gratitude and hope. And I know that as long as I'm willing to listen, as long as I'm willing to help, I'll never truly be alone. Because in the end, that's what it means to work the night shift alone. You face the darkness, not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't. You become a light in the shadows, a beacon for the lost and forgotten. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find that you were never really alone at all.